Hello, London. Hope you can all hear me. Bright lights out there. Good morning, and thank you, Howard, for the introduction. And yeah, we go back many, many years, probably more years than we would like to remember. But at least we're still here, unlike some, unfortunately. So firstly, I'd like to thank the organising committee for inviting me to the event today to deliver the keynote speech. And you can find comfort in the knowledge that I will not be using any slides, other than those you see behind me at the moment, because I reckon you'll be very much PowerPointed out by the end of the day, and so I thought I'd ease you in gently. So, keynote speech, interesting phrase, and what does it actually mean? And what's the origin? I thought it first best to find out precisely what I'm being asked to do. So I dipped into that bottomless sea of worldly knowledge, confident that everything I read would be absolutely gospel. Yeah, Wikipedia. Unsurprisingly, the phrase has a musical origin. In a group of singers, such as a barbershop quartet, the leader would hum a note in the appropriate key, thus setting the tone for the rest of the song. Likewise, I hope to set the correct tone for the presenters you will hear today. If you learn nothing further at this summit than that fact, well, at least you've got something for the next pub quiz. I was asked to focus on a range of thought-provoking and/or informative topics on the future of industrial demolition, the sector, and I will do my best to deliver on that. What I think I've ended up with is a range of related subjects, so at least hopefully something will resonate with each one of you today. I am certain I'll be unable to cover everything comprehensively, but we'll leave to try you with some takeaway food for thought. The main thrust of what I was asked to speak on is industrial decommissioning and dismantling, and demolition, obviously. What does the future hold? Whilst it's in the demolition man's DNA to bemoan the state of the business and the lack of decent tenders out there, or where is the next job coming from, the decommissioning and demolition sector is currently being presented with a massive window of opportunity, where demand for its services is rising and will continue to do so for the foreseeable future. Current indications are that there will be the projects will exponentially outstrip supply if attitudes and actions by contractors don't change. I wonder how many people in the room agree with me. We are experiencing globally an unprecedented number of assets being retired. Why? A multitude of reasons, including increasing commercial pressures on businesses, technical innovation, aging plant, geographical market shifts, stricter environmental protection compliance requirements, and many other less tangible influences. All of these factors have aligned to create a unique and exciting prospect for all of you. So what has the demolition industry got to do to capitalise on this chance of a lifetime? One thing is for sure, it has to act quickly and positively with a determination as never seen before. Let me try to give you some perspective and facts for just one market sector. Over the next 5 years, in excess of 120 coal-fired power stations scheduled for closure in Europe alone. That's in addition to those already closed. That figure is growing weekly and is absolutely mind-blowing. How many EU-based contractors are there currently with the capability and capacity to carry out this work? Let's make a guess. Possibly 25, 20, who knows? But probably not many more than that. So if the average power station takes 2.5 years to demolish, well, you can do the maths. It's already beginning to look like a little stretch, to say the least. Now make a mental note of those figures, whilst we then add on the number of chemical, petrochemical, plants, oil refineries, gas reception facilities, offshore platforms, and nuclear installations that will also be decommissioned during that period. And the picture starts to become a little overwhelming. In fact, it's almost impossible to try and get a realistic handle on the total number of opportunities out there. But you will see how the situation is going to escalate. It's the equivalent of a mouse trying to eat an elephant. Theoretically possible, but highly unlikely to succeed under any circumstances. So what happens next? Well, that's the $64,000 question. And in my opinion, there's two possible outcomes. Outcome one, clients are beginning, and it is happening, clients are beginning to be forced to engage with less able contractors in the hope that they will get through the process without health and safety incident or commercial or contractual failure. This, in my mind, is a high-risk strategy, considering the potential corporate and individual consequences of failure in any of these areas. Or outcome two, a determined course of action by contractors to invest in their businesses, train their staff, take innovative steps to get into a position to grasp the opportunity now being offered to them. There are, of course, many challenges facing companies, and I am not suggesting that there is a quick fix out there. However, the sooner the demolition industry steps up a few gears and takes control of its destiny, the better it will be for all of us. I appreciate this is a World Summit. However, please forgive me for a minute if I have a little moan at the UK contractors. Whilst working in the international market is a little bit more difficult for those based in the UK than it is for the equivalent companies in Central Europe, it should not be allowed to become an insurmountable barrier. In fact, European contractors are now beginning to make their presence felt in the UK, and very strongly. So why is it not happening in the opposite direction? The demolition sector sometimes doesn't seem to seize opportunity and tends to be slow at reacting to changing circumstances. Some of this perhaps is due to the fact that many companies remain family or owner-operated businesses, and with a "that's the way it's always been" attitude, and some perhaps due to the fear of the unknown and a reluctance to adapt to something new. The old and boring argument always put forward by contractors moving around heavy plant across borders, in my mind, is somewhat weak, as there are many, many alternatives, such as establishing strategic partnerships with foreign companies and setting up overseas businesses. Plant can be purchased or hired almost anywhere. Specialised equipment can be shipped. People can get on and off aeroplanes. The scale of the projects out there justifies some innovative thinking and effort on the part of the contractors. What demolition contractors seem to forget is that their most prized assets are their expertise, their knowledge, and their experience. Those are the jewels that they should be offering to the market. A long-reach machine is a long-reach machine. How it's put to work is what matters. Planning, organising, managing a demolition project is what matters. I cannot think of any other mainstream civil engineering discipline where there aren't contractors with a multinational or global presence. Just drive through any main industrial centre anywhere in the world and you will see the same corporate, civil contracting, engineering and professional names appearing everywhere. They didn't look inwardly, so they could remain in the comfort of their own homes. So why does the demolition industry do this? The most surprising thing is that this situation has been allowed to arise. This tsunami of heavy industrial work could have been predicted a few years ago, and still it appears we have a supply chain that is woefully underprepared. Double digits of coal-fired power station closures in the UK alone, and until very recently, few contractors have shown any interest in gearing up for these long-term, high-value contracts on their own doorsteps. Who is going to do this work? Surely those that are currently able to tackle these projects don't think that if they weren't around, the demolition industry would end. If they do feel that, it would possibly be a little bit arrogant. The changes I am talking about will happen because market forces will make them happen. What I am saying is, why is the sector appearing to be reactive and not proactive? Let's look at a couple of examples where the market appears to be broken. Explosives engineers. You can't count them on one hand, never mind two hands. There's a very, very limited choice available. And yet, there's no evidence whatsoever through the Institute of Explosives Engineers of anybody doing any training, anybody bringing anybody new into the sector to carry on those skills, which, in many circumstances, will still be valid for many years to come. Asbestos removal resources. They're so stretched now that a queue is beginning to form, leading to critical path constraints on major projects. A roll-on effect of this will be clients are being forced to delay projects, which extends their continuing holding costs, draining funds from their decommissioning budgets, hence forcing them to squeeze contractors tighter and tighter, creating a downwardly accelerating spiral. So from my perspective, if there are people in this room or elsewhere who are contemplating a lack of work out there, I don't see it that way. The work is there for those who are willing to, able to accept it. The demolition environment is a dynamic one, with probably more short and medium-term prospects than any other civil engineering sector. How to capitalise on this huge prize is something a lot of you guys should work on, and I suggest you don't delay. Moving on to another topic that Steve asked me to talk about was how can companies cope with working in different regions, different continents across the globe where standards, health and safety standards specifically, tend to vary. And it is a valid question and something that certainly gave me some concern when I first worked outside of the UK. I think the first thing one to accept is that there are no degrees of safety. It is an absolute. We don't have a very unsafe, unsafe, almost safe, nearly safe, quite safe and safe scale. It's either safe or it isn't safe. However, we do know legislation varies from country to country and region to region, as does the attitude and approach towards HSE standards and what is acceptable and what isn't. So what is our reference point? How do we make ourselves commercially competitive without compromising the principles on which our businesses and ethics are based? There are a few rules that I tend to apply in assessing whether a market or opportunity is right for us. Number one, always apply the standards that you currently use as your own baseline, which in our case is generally the EU legislation and industry best practice. Yes, of course, there are differences between country to country in Europe, but the fundamental principles of the EU directives are common. Two, always implement consistent working rules for all operatives and personnel, irrespective of the local customs and practices. This often requires you to train and explain. I recall when RVA was working in Singapore a few years ago, our management team having to demonstrate on a regular basis to a Malaysian workforce not only why harnesses should be worn, and that took a few weeks to get that one through the heads, but the next few weeks would why the harnesses then should be tethered to something when they're working at height. But we did get there, we got there in the end, and from then on, every other project was no different to running a project in the UK or elsewhere in Europe. So we have to be prepared to educate and develop when reaching into wider markets. Be selective in your choice of clients. It's important to know your customer. Be satisfied that their corporate cultures towards health and safety compliance and responsibility align with yours. Knowing which jobs to walk away from is probably more important than knowing which jobs to go for. You only get one chance to get it wrong. If the client doesn't place health and safety standards as a prime driver, then you are going to struggle with the contractor and the project, that's for sure. Don't let money and or pride override what you know to be fit and proper business decisions. Place your own businesses first. Again, from my experience, when working for major European or US-owned organisations anywhere in the world, the standards to be applied will mirror those probably that they use in their home markets. This rationale is sound and on many levels and generally driven by the fact that bad health and safety compliance is bad business. Corporate global standards are increasingly being implemented by major companies, which, when you think about it, is the only way you should operate. It doesn't make any difference whether someone is in Asia or in Europe when they ingest asbestos fibres. Injuries suffered from a fall from height are not geographically biased. The consequences are the same wherever you work in the world. One thing that has changed significantly over the years is the awareness of corporate responsibility and the need for companies to be accountable for their actions. Piper Alpha, Deepwater Horizon, VW, all reputational disasters that damaged companies on an unprecedented scale and almost immeasurable costs. The legacies of these events will not only wipe billions off their balance sheets, but also will impact on their businesses and their ability to trade in the global marketplace for many, many years to come. Moving on to the next, how many topics did he give me, by the way, Steve? Moving on to the next topic, you said it was 10 minutes. Moving on to another topic that was on the list today is, where is innovation required in the demolition sector? Well, firstly, I have to say, and I think certainly Howard, we've had this conversation before, would agree with me, is that I think the industry is and always has been innovative in its approach. One of the benefits, I guess, of being the poor relation of the civil engineering sector is that you have to fend for yourself. A little like being the runt of the litter. And before you shout me down, I include myself as a son of the same litter. Anyone who has been involved in demolition for over 30 years will appreciate that purpose-made plant with specialised attachments that all you guys here are selling to us today are a relatively new happening for the industry. In the past, we had to make do with whatever was available and had been developed for other areas of civil engineering. The best you could hope for was a 22RB with a crawler, with a demolition ball, or maybe, if you were really lucky and posh, a magnet as well. A Cat 245, a JCB, wheeled loader, or a back actor. That was about your lot. Most of these were undersized, underpowered, and probably well past their sell-by dates. A demolition site was a dumping ground for contractors' plant cast-offs that were routinely ended up in the bin at the end of the job. In fact, it was often difficult to distinguish between the scrap arising from the demolition works and the plant that was processing it. But that's not the case anymore, I'm pleased to say. And the range and type of bespoke plant and equipment available to the contractors is now vast and continuing to evolve, not only making the work much safer, but more efficient. The sums of money being poured into sophisticated, modern and eco-friendly plant is mind-blowing, and I congratulate the industry for doing that. But isn't that where the real value and innovation comes from that? It's not just the hardware. If you have the money, you can buy it. No, the asset, as I said earlier on, is in the skills of the contractor and its personnel. As we begin to tackle larger, more complex and sophisticated structures and plant, deal with higher hazards in the process sector, have more robust targets when it comes to environmental protection, the true worth of the discipline expertise begins to become apparent. Just wind back 20 years to see how things have moved on, whether it be in a city centre, heavy industrial, petrochemical, or chemical setting. We are now seeing demolition of structures that at the time of building, no one had a clue how they were going to be demolished. Some of the techniques now being implemented hadn't even been thought of, never mind developed to a point where they could be rolled out safely. So the adage that necessity is the mother of invention could not be more clearly demonstrated than in our industry. If someone puts it there, then there's a way of getting rid of it. It just has to be thought about and developed, designed and actioned. A demolition man is an expert in doing this. So, what are the morning's takeaways? What are the things to think about through the rest of the day when you listen to all the other speakers? There's a huge market out there for you guys, and it's getting bigger every day. The opportunities are massive, but they won't come to you. You need to go to them, and quickly. Look past your own back garden. Be proactive in reaching out to clients. Build into company and international relationships where they are beneficial. Be careful in your selection of both partners and clients. As my dear departed mother always told me, you lay down with dogs, you wake up with fleas. Make sure you choose the right partners. There's enough work out there, believe me, without having to compromise your business's principles or standards. Don't be reluctant to push into new markets. You won't find anything there that you won't have seen before. It'll just have a different name or clause in a regulation. Safety is safety. Demolition is demolition, whichever part of the world you are in. Thank you. Sorry?
Thank you very much, Richard. We've got to do a bit of a juggling act now because we've only got one mic, but I found that a very interesting and thought-provoking presentation, particularly about the innovation. I can remember back in my days, we managed to have a 22RB and a drop. We couldn't quite stretch to a 245. But, any questions for Richard? At the back there, John.
Richard, it's John Wood. I was interested that you said we're struggling to get explosives engineers in the UK into the industry. I'd be very interested in if we could speak to the Institute of Explosives Engineers to get them to endorse a course which has been written by myself, Dick Green and William Sinclair to get people to go from the shop fire certificate to be a true demolition explosives engineer. Do you think there's any possibility that we could do that, perhaps with the involvement of the NDTG?
I think every avenue is worth exploring, John. As I said, I think in globally, you'd be struggling to make one football team out of explosives engineers in demolition, never mind two. And, you know, with respect to all of them, none of them are young kids anymore. So I think if we don't do something about explosives engineering and encourage people to come into it, it is a discipline, it is a technique that will disappear out of demolition. And whilst we've got bigger machines and we've got long reach and we've got other ways of doing things, there are certain structures from a safety perspective alone, such as cooling towers and very high stacks and things like that, that will always benefit from the use of explosives to take them down. So, yeah, I think it's something that certainly the IDE would, the IEXPE would be interested in talking about. Absolutely.
From our side, John, we have been looking at that through the NDTG. We actually approached CITB for some assistance with that, and unfortunately it's the consensus year this year. They seem to be quite preoccupied with their future development, etc. So it didn't get very far this year, but it's something that will certainly be back on the agenda now that they have got the vote through. So, yeah, we were looking at expanding it as well, John, to something like covering the machine drivers when they're cleaning up after an explosive operation. There's always a possibility that there's something that hasn't gone off, possibly a bit of det cord or something. So we were thinking of a training course there as well. So it's something that is certainly on the NDTG horizon.
We're thinking of a minimum of 7 days in the classroom.
Yep, good. Any other questions?
I think that's fine, John. But if you don't, I don't mind you saying that the classroom is great, but when you're doing things like preparing power station boilers or whatever it is, you've got to get guys out on the tools. They've got to learn, you know, drilling a hole is not just drilling a hole. Fixing a shaped charge is not just fixing a shaped charge. You know, they've got to be some practical. Some of the contractors, in my opinion, should be investing in training, bringing people in as, you know, postgrads, whatever, young guys, struck with maybe even structural engineering background, and training them as explosives engineers.
We have another question here.
Yeah, when you say demolition is demolition everywhere in the world, of course it is, and safety is safety everywhere in the world. But when you want to work abroad, don't you think the language barrier is a really obstacle?
I don't think so. You know, I can only talk from my own experience. So we've been on projects where we've had 4 or 5 languages working together, disassembling a paper machine from Scotland to go to former Soviet Union area. And we had to have certain documentation written in multiple languages. We're working at the moment on a multiple language site. Generally, English seems to be the most common language spoken, but it's not always, and certainly at workplace level is where the problem is, not so much at the management level. But again, systems, processes, education, we manage to overcome these on every occasion. So you know, I still feel that the demolition is the same wherever you are doing it, but you've just got a few more obstacles to deal with.
Thank you. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to move on. So we're catching up on time. Thank you very much for that, Richard. Very well done.
Thank you.